This is, yeah. Okay, greetings, howdy, good to see y'all. I'm a Fort Worth boy, but now I live in Wise County. And I'll be honest with you, I try my best not to come to Dallas. You folks are fine, but man, the traffic and everything's, especially trying to come through Fort Worth and all that construction that's going on, it's I kind of wonder because, they say we're too broke, they want to cut Social Security and we can't seem to get our infrastructure going. The American Society of Civil Engineers gives the infrastructure in this country a grade of D plus, is one step above failing. And yet, for some reason, we seem to have millions and millions of dollars to spend on bombs and rockets and but we don't have any money for education or good food or clean water. I don't know. So, what's going on? Well, I'm here to tell you my latest book here, as you can see, is Population Control. More importantly, how corporate owners are killing us. Now, this is serious, folks, because this is, to me, beyond politics. This is beyond even philosophical debate. Folks, we're now talking about self-defense. You better listen to what I'm saying, pay attention, read my book, read the other materials, start working with your local organizations and your meetups, because there are people up at the level of world governments who want you dead. Okay? And you better figure it all out. So, without further ado, here we go. In 1952, corporations accounted for 32% of federal tax revenues. By 2013, this number was less than 10%. They're not paying their fair share of taxes, but they have more than their fair share of sway in Washington. Also in 2013, it's interesting that 46 U.S. corporations were blacklisted by the World Bank, which is one of their supporters, for corruption. And even the World Bank is under corruption charges. And of course, this is all because now we have corporate crime. Thomas Jefferson pretty well lined it up back in 1809 in a letter when he said, if the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of the currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. The issuing power should be taken from the banks and restored to the people to whom it properly belongs. Now, you might think, well, what is he talking about? Well, just go drive along I-30 or LBJ Freeway and look at all of the miles and miles of apartments, condominiums, and think about your kids, your grandkids. They seem to be living a good lifestyle because they have a nice apartment, but they don't own anything. They don't even own those clothes in their closet or their TV or anything else. They're all paying on it. Everybody's in debt. Everybody's in debt. We are a debt society. And just to show you that this is not conspiracy theory, in 2011 there was a study by the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. They studied 43,000 multinational corporations, and they found that they were essentially controlled by 1,318 companies with interlocking ownership. These 1,300 companies in turn were controlled by 147 interlocking firms that collectively control more than 60% of global revenues. Holy cow. And these 147 interlocking firms, in turn, will pretty much control by about 20 banks. And this is just intense centralized control. And this is, and then the study pointed out that they did not analyze family, social, or relationships of owners and stockholders. For example, back in the 80s when the then head of the CIA, William Casey, he had controlling interest in a company called Resorts International. And Resorts International turned around and bought ABC Television, a company 2/3 larger than itself. And I'm thinking now, how does that work? And does this give Bill Casey, head of the CIA, control of ABC? Well, yes, it did. Even though if you stop and go back and look at the AP story, it said that Casey only owned 6% of the stock of FC's communication. But it also said his wife owned a like amount. So we figure he's got 12% of the stock of ABC, and no one else owned more than 5% of ABC stock. This makes him the majority stockholder, which means he can tell them what to do and they have to listen. This is the ownership that I'm talking about when I talk about these multinational corporations. Everybody thinks about the presidents and the vice presidents, No, these are not necessarily bad, evil people. They may be perfectly fine, honest, capable, certainly capable people, probably got Harvard business degrees. But they don't determine the policy of these corporations. They are capable administrators. They're there to see that the corporation runs on an efficient, effective basis. And most of them do a pretty good job, as well they should, since they're making millions of dollars personally. I mean, I don't have to tell you guys how much money some of these corporate executives are making, and you can figure what the owners are doing. So there is this small clique of people who are trying to run the world. And here's a couple of quick ways how they're doing it, stuff that you've probably never heard of. The Financial Stability Board. This was created in 2009 when Obama signed the agreement at the G20. G20, of course, is the meeting of the 20 countries and their financial ministers. And it's composed of central bankers from the G20 nations. And it's an outgrowth of the Financial Stability Committee of the old Bank for International Settlements, which was a Nazi-controlled bank before, during, and after World War II. Now, you need to read my Rise and Forthright, it'll tell you all about it. And essentially, the Financial Stability Board is going to dictate economic policy to the Fed, the SEC, other policy groups. So in other words, in effect, Obama has signed us up for our entire U.S. economic policy is now in the hands of these international bankers. Another thing that you probably don't know about is the Exchange Stabilization Fund. This was created during the 30s, during the height of the Depression, and it handles all of the transfer of big money through the banking system. It's also the founder of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. And of course, it's controlled by these very same bankers. It has been directly involved in virtually every major U.S. scandal since its creation in 1934, including CIA drug trafficking, Iran-Contra, and even the JFK assassination. And of course, all of this now is fully entrenched and fully backed by the national security state, which was put into effect because of 9/11, of course, and creation of Homeland Security, or should I say the Gestapo, because what the Nazis did upon taking power in Germany in the 1930s was create the Geheime Staatspolizei, or the Gestapo, the secret state police. And what that did was bring all of the police agencies in Germany under the umbrella control of the Gestapo. When we created the Patriot Act and when we created Homeland Security, this is the same thing we did. Every little small town police department is now under the control of Homeland Security. We do have a national security state. And interestingly enough, this is something that J. Edgar Hoover fought against his entire career. Not because he was altruistic and really favored freedom and liberty, but because he didn't want anybody competing with his FBI. But yet he kept warning us about a national police force, and now we have it, thanks to the Patriot Act, and then the creation of Homeland Security, the Military Commissions Act, the National Defense Authorization Act, National Defense Resource Preparedness Order. Y'all need to read that. It'll make your skin crawl. Okay? In case of any national emergency, it used to be war, but now it's not war, it's just any national emergency. And what that is that? Anything the president wants to sign his name to. All of the natural resources, water, food, transportation, energy, all comes under direct federal control. Now, you ready for this? If they declare this emergency, in fact, it's already in effect, they're not pushing it yet. Guess who's in charge of the entire water supply? The water supply you drink, the water you buy at the store, everything except soft drinks. Guess who's in charge under the National Defense Resources and Preparedness Order? The Secretary of Defense is going to decide who gets water and who doesn't. And behind all of this is eugenics, the idea of who's your daddy, okay? And the idea that we need to improve the human race, which entails population control. And they're doing this by a number of ways, by bad air, bad water, bad vaccines, GMOs. Y'all need to check out the 100+ dead microbiologists who have all died under suspicious circumstances over the past several years. These are the very people who, if there is a deadly pandemic, can probably tell us what's real, what's not, and where the cures are, but they won't because they're not around anymore. And while I'm at it, before I forget about it, y'all need to keep this in your mind. Capital G, a little c, capital M-A-F. GCMAF. This is a naturally produced enzyme protein in your body that pumps up your immunization system, and they have been studying this. There's a group of about 8 doctors centered mostly in Florida that have been working with this GCMAF, and they are having tremendous success in reversing, curing, not remission, curing cancer and remission of autism, and in the process, the curing bacterial and viral infections. Okay, so what happened to these 8? Well, first, they got raided by the FDA. And I've seen the search warrants on 2 of them, and they specifically are after all of their material on GCMAF. All right, and then within a few weeks, they all turned up dead. Okay, now this is my old joke about I don't believe anything's true until the government denies it. When they kill these guys off, this tells me this has got to be the real deal. This really works, okay? Because if you think about it, if they had a cure for cancer, if they had a cure for autism, if they had a cure for viral and bacterial diseases, what is that going to do to the pharmaceutical and medical? I mean, it's going to devastate them. So would they be willing to kill to protect that? Absolutely. I've said for years they'll never have a cure for cancer because there's more people making a living off of cancer than dying from it. Right? And as long as it's that way, you know, they're never going to have a cure. Okay, so keep an eye on GCMAF and keep pushing it. We need to get this out to the public so that demand that people study this. It's legal in Europe. It's legal in Japan. Okay, but we can't get it here. And if you're a doctor and you try to get it here, then they raid you. And if that doesn't work, then they kill you. Eugenics goes all the way back. Eugenics movement actually started in the United States with Harrimans. Mrs. Harriman was the one of the first leading eugenicists. And of course, the Bush family are the proteges of the Harrimans. They're all tightly connected. And this map comes from 1935, and you can see, with the exception of Texas, looks like Missouri, maybe Illinois, but for most of the states, they had eugenics laws. If you didn't fit their standard of mental or physical or ethnicity, then they could order you sterilized. Now, the Germans picked this up, okay, and thought it was a pretty good idea. So they carried it to its logical extreme. We think that certain elements of society should be not permitted to procreate. In fact, we'll just go in a step further and let's just kill them, put them in camps. So we had the Holocaust and we had World War II, and luckily the rest of the world kind of, recoiled and said, wait a minute, we don't think this is the way to go. So now, today, they're still there at the very top of the food chain. They want you dead, but they know they can't just round everybody up and put them in a camp and gas them like the Nazis did, because it didn't work out too well for them. So, but the ideas are still there today. Margaret Sanger, for example, who is the founder of Planned Parenthood, said colored people are like human weeds, need to be exterminated. And Hillary Clinton loves her, thinks she's great, and she says she admires her vision. In fact, if you've kept up with it, you'll realize that they now have tapes of Planned Parenthood selling the parts of fetuses. Okay, and this is all part of it. Population control is nothing new, and the methods vary. They want to reduce the human population. This is codified in the Georgia Guidestones, whose very first admonition says, maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. Oh boy, that sounds really good. Until you stop and say, no, oops, wait a minute. Right now, there's 7.5 billion people in the world. Number one, what are they going to do with the other 7 billion people? And number two, and more importantly, who's going to decide what happens to these other 7 billion people? And believe me, they know what needs to be done. Jacques Cousteau will tell you. General Maxwell Taylor, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs and a big Council on Foreign Relations guy, says that it's necessary to reduce the world's population, mostly in third world countries, using methods such as disease, starvation, and regional wars. Oops, doesn't it sound like exactly what's going on right now? Bill Gates, well, hey, if we do a really good job on the new vaccines, we can reduce the population by 10 to 15%, Henry Kissinger in his paper back during the Ford administration said depopulation should be the highest priority. Ted Turner, same thing. But I think the one that really nails it is Prince Philip, who says human population growth is probably the single most serious long-term threat to survival. If it isn't controlled voluntarily, it will be controlled involuntarily by an increase in disease, starvation, and war. And I ask you, especially in third world countries, isn't this exactly what we see going on? And to show you that he wasn't kidding about it, at another point he said, in the event that I'm reincarnated, I'd like to return as a deadly virus in order to contribute something to solve overpopulation. He wants you dead. All right? And he is part of this global elite who control these multinational corporations. Now, if that's not bad enough, here we have John Holdren, okay? And he wrote in this book, Ecoscience, along with an early couple. Many of my colleagues feel that some sort of compulsory birth regulation would be necessary to achieve such control over population growth. One plan often mentioned involves the addition of temporary sterilants to water supplies or staple food. Doses of the antidote would be carefully rationed by the government to produce the desired population size. And who is John Holdren? He is the science czar to President Obama. So he's got President Obama's ear, and they want you dead. All of them decide on global population. And how are we going to do this? Well, by the way, the reason for the 8 doctors that were dead because of their study of GCMAF, what they determined is that there is an enzyme called Nagalase, Nagalase, that blocks your body's production of GCMAF. And it reduces your ability of your immunization system to ward off serious diseases. And the charge is that they are putting this Nagalase in some of the vaccinations. So when you get vaccinated, they put this in your body cannot produce enough GCMAF, and we're all falling victim to these diseases, which I never heard about back in the 50s and 60s, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is all part of a surreptitious effort to reduce the world population. But now I'll throw this at you. Is there really a problem with overpopulation? I maintain no, because right now the current average living space in Hong Kong, which if you think about it is a bunch of condominiums, high-rises built on those islands, is 1,700 square feet. Hey, I lived in apartments as a young guy. 1,700 square feet, it's a big apartment, that's a lot of space. Based on 1,700 square feet, the entire 7.5 billion human population could live comfortably enough in the state of Texas. We don't want them all coming here. The point is they could. And if they wanted to really spread out and maybe have an acre or so apiece, then the whole human population could fit very easily in Australia. Okay? So it's not really a overpopulation as so much as it is a population concentration. Everybody's jammed in these cities, and you see what's happening. I'm trying to come from Wise County through Fort and Dallas. Every time I turn around, there's road work going on. You got an 8-lane road, and it's still not enough. They're going to have to expand more lanes, And of course, how do you control people? Well, it used to be control oil. You control nations, said Henry Kissinger, but you control food and you control the people. And I would add water to that, and this is what they're working on. So, one way they're trying to get you is through deadly food. In the 1950s, when I was growing up in the 40s and 50s, the U.S. was predominantly rural, and we had fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, probably locally grown. Same thing with meat, especially here in Texas. I only after I went off in the Army and traveled extensively in the North did I realize that there are many places in the United States where you can't get a decent cut of meat, okay? But Texas we can because we got lots of cows down here and lots of steers. Plus so many people in Texas know the cattle industry and they know what good beef is, and if you don't offer them some pretty good cuts of meat, they won't buy it. But other places, it's incredible. But then beginning in the 50s, though, we started getting processed food. I can even remember when TV dinners came out and everybody was so thrilled. Oh, boy, man, all you got to do is throw this thing in, heat it up, you've got a nice hot meal, you know. Never mind that it was primarily chemicals. And now today, in the 60s and 70s, you're subjected to imitation food, processed consumables, and they appear and taste nutritious, but they're not. You're not getting proper nutrition. And by the 70s and 80s, we're raised on imitation foods, fluoridated water, and the whole public has become apathetic and distracted. A survey of more than 3.5 million Americans showed from 1993 to 2008, obesity decreased by 85%. So today, here we have the idealized picture of life in America in the year 2000 or so, or 2020. See, here we are. But no, this is more like what it is. Now, you know, did we all just wake up and decide we want to be obese? Or are we given bad food, and thanks to advertising and the media, we're told this is the way to go. So what do you do about it? Okay, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, because most of y'all probably already know this, you wouldn't be here. Buy organic, okay? And even then you got a problem, because in researching organic food, it has to be certified organic by the federal government. And now you're into corrupt bureaucrats, the very same ones that are fill the IRS and the Drug Administration and the FDA and everything else. So even when it says organic, you have to be careful, because sometimes they don't really mean that. For example, in the beef industry, to be labeled organic beef, according to their criteria, the cattle have to have access to open fields, okay? Well, the key word there is access. So you got them all in a pen, shoulder to shoulder, but there's a gate. It's closed, but they do have access. They can get to the field. So, you know, they're the companies and the people in these corporations are being run by these eugenicists and these globalists. They've always got fine print. They've always got wiggle room. So just even be careful with organic food. Now I want to talk to you about the God Syndicate. Okay, this is another way that they're killing us and putting us down. The God Syndicate: guns, oil, drugs. The three largest money-making commodities in the world, and they're all controlled by the same globalists that I'm talking about. Guns. I love guns. Number one, we are the arms merchant of the world. According to congressional reports from 2004 to 2011, 78% of the arms traded around the world came from the United States. 78%. Yeah, but wait a minute. What about our perceived enemies? What about Russia, China? Oops, Russia, 5.7%. China, 3%. The United States sells more arms around the world than Russia and China put together. And the irony, and then this is done not only, that does not even count government-to-government sales. You know, we're always selling other countries like Israel, F-16s, and jets, and guns, and bombs, and everything else, but that's government-to-government. We also, under the Justice Department and under the State Department, rather, we have direct commercial sales, and this is where companies, private companies, can sell weaponry to people all around the world. And it supposedly has some checks and balances to where it's against the law to sell weapons to a known terrorist group. But That's by the boards. They do it all the time anyway. And if you'll think about it, if you'll go back and check September the 13th, 2013, we find that President Obama officially announced that he was bypassing the law that says you can't sell to a known terrorist group because he wanted to arm the Syrian rebels so they could overthrow Assad. Okay? And we did. We gave them all these Stinger missiles. We gave them all kinds of things. And what did they do? They turned into ISIS. So if you are afraid of the Islamic Caliphate or ISIS, then you can blame your own government because we created them in army. And then, of course, let's not forget Fast and Furious, where the Justice Department coerced Southwestern gun shop owners to sell to Mexican drug lords with the cockamamie idea that we were going to track these arms and find out where they went in Mexico. But just think about that a half minute. Once they cross the border, how are we going to know where they go? No, that was all a not so very obvious ploy to cause violence on the Texas border, on the southern border, so they could push their gun control agenda. And this is the thing that really kills me. Despite having less than 5% of the world's population, roughly 35 to 50% of the world's civilian-owned guns are in the United States. This is what they're working on. And the great irony is that while the United States is the biggest arms dealer in the world, we'll sell everybody and anybody arms all around the world, but here at home, they want to take your guns away. And yet, all you have to do is look at the statistic. Look at Switzerland and Finland. They have the top 10 highest rates of gun ownership. In Switzerland, it's against the law not to own a gun. Okay? Because they're smaller countries surrounded by mountains, and they can hold those mountain passes if they have enough people that are armed. And so as a result, in Switzerland, you're required to have a rifle in your home and know how to use it. Okay? And Switzerland and Finland about the same way, and they have the lowest crime rates in the world. And we can find the same thing right here at home. California in 2012, gun deaths. California, 1,304. Chicago, just a city, 400. Detroit, just a city, 461. Pennsylvania, 470. New York State, with strict gun laws, 774. Well, wait a minute, what about Alabama? They're very lenient. Everybody in Alabama can have a gun, kind of like here in Texas. They had one. What does that tell you? If people have guns, they're a little more considerate. If you're out driving on the freeway and you know everybody's got a gun, you're probably not going to flip off that guy next to you. In Chicago, which has some of the toughest gun laws in the country, July the 4th, 2014, that one weekend, there were 84 shootings and 14 homicides. No, guns save lives. But you wouldn't know that by listening to the media, would you? Oil. That also you've been lied to. Back in the 50s, this guy, Marion King, came up with the idea of peak oil. He said there's only so much oil, and we're sucking it out faster than it can be replenished, and that by the year 2000, we're going to hit the peak, and from then on, you have less and less and less oil. Well, it turned out not to be true. Peak oil proved false because there were new records set in oil production in 2011, 2012. But here's the key thing. If somebody tries to tell you we're running out of oil, you give them three words. The Bakken Rock Formation, okay? The Bakken, B-A-K-K-E-N Rock Formation underlies North Dakota, Montana, and up into Saskatchewan in Canada, and is said one of the largest unproduced oil reserves in the world. And the experts say there's enough petroleum in the ground there to last us at increased rates of consumption for almost 2,000 years. Okay, so there is no shortage of oil. And now you see this, if oil was truly draining away, and the gasoline prices now would be up around $4, $5 a gallon or more. And if you've noticed, they're coming under $2 right now because we're awash in oil. But we don't want to do that anyway because oil pollution is killing us, okay? Not only the hydrocarbons that these internal combustion engines are putting in the air, but then pollution from oil spills and oil explosions like in the Gulf, which, by the way, is still spewing oil. And they're still pouring Corexit on it, which simply is pushing that to the bottom of the Gulf. If you'll talk to people who live on the Gulf, they'll tell you don't eat anything out of the Gulf. And unfortunately now the Pacific's becoming the same way. So what do? We need to go to clean energy. I'm in touch with a fellow in New Jersey named Mike Stritzky. He's getting ready to open up his model solar hydrogen home. He used to work for the government. He's a very hands-on type guy, and he has equipped his whole house in the backyard with some solar panels that gives him enough electricity to run an electrolyzing plate where he separates the from water, H2O, 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. He separates the hydrogen and oxygen through his hydrolyzing plate. And then the oxygen, he just vents into the air, so he's putting good clean oxygen in the air. The hydrogen, he has retooled his cars and his trucks, his lawnmower, his edger, to run on hydrogen. And there is no pollution whatsoever. It's clean energy. And he's making his own energy. When Hurricane Sandy hit in New Jersey, all of the neighborhoods around him went dark. The power was knocked out for days on end. His was the only house that had lights burning, had the air conditioners working, heat working, because he had his own energy that he was making in his backyard. And what's really good is when I was talking with him, he was telling me how all his neighbors would come by every day lining up so they could go in and charge their batteries and their cell phones with his electrical outlets. It can be done, folks. The technology is there. If these people who want you dead would release it. We all know about Tesla, and we know that he is setting up Wardenclyffe, where he was going to be able to draw energy out of the earth and then transfer it without wires. But of course, he got shut down, and some of his materials are still classified by the federal government. Again, they don't want you to be prosperous and energy independent. Drugs. In 2008, the big farm grossed nearly $1 trillion worldwide selling drugs, with more than $80 billion going for these psychiatric drugs, of which you'll hear more later because that's the cause of some of our biggest headaches. We are now the most drugged nation in history. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that. Alcohol prohibition was from 1920 to 1933, just 13 years. And yet we've had drug prohibition since 1930 with no end in sight, although they're beginning to back off so many states now. In fact, I think they have now said that America, and you may not know this because they don't want you to know this, but medical marijuana is now considered okay in every state. Okay? And even law enforcement, there is an outfit called LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. And they say, this is ridiculous. I have a good friend of mine, a kid that grew up, I knew him as a kid. He's now a retired colonel in the Air Force and works for a federal drug program thing out in West Texas. And he told me, he said, the drug war's lost. He said, but, I can make money this way. So he's still going through the motions. It's incredible. And here's where we are. Marijuana is still Schedule 1 on the DEA, Drug Enforcement. And that means it's right there with heroin, crack, cocaine, and meth, okay? Now, everybody's going, yeah, but nobody's ever died from an overdose of marijuana, which is true. And they said that we have all these studies and all these narratives that tell us that medical marijuana is good for you. It'll really help you. And they said, we want to study it and see if we can prove that out. But the DEA says, no, you can't do that because it's a Schedule 1. If it's Schedule 1, you can't have any permission to test it. They said, well, then why is it Schedule 1? They said, well, because there hadn't been enough studies. Yeah, exactly. And that's where we are. It's incredible. And yet, the University of Madrid has shown that the psychoactive chemical in marijuana, THC, actually kills cancer cells. So here's a cancer cell. And maybe here's the whole deal, and maybe this is why all of a sudden now we see this legalization of marijuana taking place, because in 2003, patent number 6,635,07 was issued to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services for medical marijuana. So the federal government can get a patent on it, and according to this patent application, which I've read, it says this really helps in the treatment of cancer and various other chronic diseases. And so the government wants to get a patent on it, but for you and I, the Dallas police will still bust you. It's unconscionable. And in fact, today we have a larger prison population in the United States than all of the prisons in Europe put together. Now what does that say? And the vast majority of the people in prisons today are in there for drug offenses. And most of them for marijuana. Some years ago, and this is probably still the same thing, but a good friend of mine I went to high school with ended up being the chief legal consultant or chief lawyer for the Texas prison system. And she told me that about 80 to 90% of the inmates in the Texas prison system, which is overcrowded, are all in their own drug offenses. And the vast majority of them on simple possession of marijuana. So we're just shooting ourselves in the foot about this. Now, are you ready for this? The number one leading cause of death in the United States is heart disease, heart attack. Okay, no surprise there. The second leading cause of death is cancer. No surprise there. The third leading cause of death in the United States today is conventional medical treatment. Not drug overdose, not misuse of drugs, but conventional medical treatment. Infections picked up in hospitals, wrongful surgeries done in hospitals, reactions to correctly prescribed drugs. So what's going on here? The late Barbara Starfield even published an article in the AMA Journal where she shows that more than 250 million Americans die every year as a result of conventional medical care. And the way the FDA works is they are actually making money for telling you which drugs to use. And with profits of some $160 billion a year, as I said before, more people are making a living off cancer than dying from it. And yet, again, there are alternative ways. Any of you know about Dr. Raymond Royal Rife, okay? I've had a Rife machine now. Actually, I've got three. I've had one for about 15 years. My youngest daughter suffered an entire life from chronic asthma. At one point, we were spending hundreds of dollars a month on asthma medications, on those breathing machines, and usually maybe once or twice a year a trip to the hospital. We tried everything. We tried acupuncture. We tried chiropractic. We tried all kinds of things. Finally, I met a EO doctor friend of mine said, "Have you tried Rife technology?" And I said, "What's that?" Well, Royal Raymond Rife back in the 20s discovered that every living thing has an energy field. We all have an energy field. Sometimes it's called the aura, okay, but we know it's there. It can be scientifically shown that we have an energy field around us. Every living thing has an energy field, including one-cell organisms like viruses and bacteria. And all you have to do is use a machine to figure out what the frequency is of that energy field, and then you bombard that energy field with that frequency, but at a high intensity. And as you can see from here, it actually bursts these cells. It kills them. Okay? So using Rife technology, which has been in use since the 1920s, you can cure cancer, you can cure all kinds of things if you find the right frequency. All right? So here's one way of doing it. Now, according to the Journal of the National Cancer Institute, the 1-year cost of treating a person for cancer comes to $2.3 billion. That includes time spent getting care, chemo, radiation therapy, blood tests, cancer scans, surgery, checkups, driving, medical time, time waiting in waiting rooms, and everything else. In the 1930s, Royal Rife had 17 cancer patients that were terminal, and he cured all 17. Not remission, he cured them with the use of his frequency machines, okay? And I figured out I studied the frequencies he was using and the amount of time it took to do that, and then computed that with my electric bill And he cured these patients of terminal cancer with 33 cents worth of electricity. Now do you understand why we have cancer and it's running rampant and they don't seem to be able to find a cure for it? In fact, actually, you go back to 1923 when Dr. Otto Warburg discovered the true cause of cancer and won a Nobel Prize. Okay, basically, it's cancerous tissues are acidic. Healthy tissues are alkaline. Acidic, you get acidic, your system is acidic if you eat a lot of sugar. And this includes breads and doughs and pastas because that turns to sugar in your system. And if your system is full of sugar, it's acidic, and cancers grow, thrive, do well. If you stop your sugar intake, stop your bread intake and your pasta, then you have an alkaline system, and cancer cells cannot grow, in fact, will die. And we've known this since 1923, but of course you don't get told that. This is one of my favorite things. You see the little bottle here. It says FDA approved drug. Warning, contains FDA approved drug. So you better be careful. For example, before being withdrawn in 2004, Merck had produced Vioxx, which ended up killing 60,000 people. And yet, what's really wild is that finally they couldn't avoid it anymore. And in 2004, Merck finally had to pull Vioxx off the shelves. But in October the 30th of 2005, about a year after they had pulled Vioxx, the FDA, not knowing what the other hand had done, had approved Vioxx for children. Sheesh. Bill Gates, he wants to vaccinate everybody. And yet last year, UNICEF and the World Health Organization injected 2 million Kenyan women with a vaccine that was found to contain a sterilization chemical. Okay? And then I've already told you about the Nagalese and the GCMAX. They want you dead. If you're smart, you'll never take another vaccine. Or at least be damn careful. If I cut my foot on a rusty nail, yeah, you better bet I'll probably go get a tetanus shot. There are certain things that are sensible. But, where it used to be, I know when I was a kid, I think we had 4 vaccinations. Today, they got 40, and they got 200 in the pipeline. Plus, as they've done in California, they've already passed a law, signed into law by the governor, requiring all children to have vaccinated if they're going to be allowed in public schools. If there's any chance in anything, there needs to be a choice. This is nothing but tyranny. They're going to force you to take vaccinations. And just to show you, well, I've already mentioned this. Today, the CDC recommends 48 doses of 14 vaccines before the age of 6, including little infants. They can't handle it. And this goes back to, if they're so safe, why was it in 1986 Congress passed the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, which relieves the pharmaceutical companies of any liability due to damage caused by their vaccines. If you have a child, and this has happened over and over and over again, if you have a child and you are convinced that he was or she was damaged by a vaccine, then you can apply to the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program of the federal government. And if you have the money to hire lawyers, and if you have the money to hire doctors, and they testify that your child was okay until they got the vaccine, and if you go through and jump through hoops and go through all of this, you might be able to get some money out of the federal Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, which, by the way, between 1989 and 2013, came up to $2,704,000,000. It's now up over $3 billion that they've paid out to people who have gone through that rigorous process and proved that their children were damaged by vaccines. Again, if there's chance, then there should be choice. By the way, in England recently, they paid out $90 million to 800 families of children who were harmed by the swine flu vaccine. So, parents and grandparents, be very, very careful in what you're doing with these vaccines, because in many instances, it's not even the vaccine itself. It's the bovine cow serum, the sorbitol, gelatin, thimerosal, human albumin, formaldehyde, everything else is Nagalese, it's everything else that they're putting in these vaccines. Now, if they're going to call for mandatory vaccinations for all citizens, which they're doing, How come they won't even stop illegal immigration with people, all kinds of infections coming across our border? And one of the reasons for this is because there is a revolving door between federal regulators that are supposed to be looking out for your health and the very people making the vaccines. This is Dr. Judy Giverty, who all through the Bush administration was the head of the CDC, and of course, touting out that you must take your vaccinations. Well, when Bush left office, she left her position to become president of Merck Pharmaceuticals Vaccine Division. Now, whether or not there was any genuine conflict of interest there, it certainly appears that way, doesn't it? It should be that way. Government regulators should not be able to move right on into the very industries that they're supposed to be regulating. And this happens time and time again. Any of y'all familiar with the military, the Pentagon, military procurements? These procurement officers often retire at the ripe old age of 40 and then become vice presidents of Ling Cobalt or General Dynamics. They're the very people that they were buying from. That needs to be stopped. Now, but the experts tell us that vaccines are safe and they're great. You got to take it. Well, I'm old enough to remember, and I've noticed some of you guys are too. Remember when the doctors were telling us to smoke Camels? They're good for you. Smoke Philip Morris. They're good for you. So just because there's an expert doesn't mean you have to believe everything they say. In fact, as a reporter who covered courtrooms of all stripes, criminals, civilian, civil, I have firmly come to the understanding that if you have enough money, you can always hire an expert to tell you anything you want to hear. They'll tell you how many angels can dance on the end of a pin. Now, the one thing that I think we are rightly concerned about are these mass shootings, and particularly shootings at schools. Okay, wait a minute. I don't know about you guys, but I grew up right around here in Fort Southern, South Fort Worth. We had guns. Hell, we even took guns to school. I had a lot of friends that had shotguns or rifles in the pickup truck on the gun rack. Nobody shot anybody. Okay? But since 1999, it's just, all of a sudden there's shootings at the school. So what's changed? Well, if you listen to the mass media, it's because of guns. Guns do a lot of guns. No, it's not the guns. It's the medication. It is the psychotropic drugs. Elliot Rogers killed 6 people in California, 3 with a knife, 1 he ran over in his car, and yet the media and his father could only talk about his guns. Cho at Virginia Tech. And the common denominator is they were all on these psychiatric drugs. And if you read the fine print, even the drug manufacturers will tell you that they induce suicidal and homicidal tendencies. So you take somebody that's on the edge anyway, and you give them these drugs, no wonder they go over. Same thing with Ivan Lopez, killed 4 persons at Fort Hood. He was being treated. Alexis, the guy shot in the Navy Yard, same deal. They're all on these drugs. Here's some more. You can just go down the list. They're all on the psychiatric drugs, but the media won't tell you that. All they talk about is guns, as if guns are the problem. But as we saw from the statistic, the more guns there are, the more lenient the gun laws, the less crime you have. And I know, for example, when I was a kid in school, I was an avid reader. I was reading stuff about the 6th grade. I'd already read all kinds of things. I read with the so-called classics, Ivanhoe, Tale of Two Cities, Mark Twain, Robert Louis Stevenson. I read all those. And I'd read everything. So we were reading in class, and I'd be a chapter ahead of the rest of the class. So I'd get bored, and I'd start looking out the window. Teacher would come by, slap me on the wrist, and say, "Stay with the rest of the class, Jimmy." "Yes, ma'am." And I'd go back, to where we start off again, where everybody else was. Okay? But that was back in the days of the old republic. Today, I would have been sent to the nurse who has been trained and conditioned to report me to the school psychologist, who would say, well, he probably has attention deficit disorder, and they put me on Ritalin, or Prozac, okay, and then wonder why I went off my head and maybe tried to shoot somebody. It's absolutely incredible. In 2013, the CDC reported that Medicaid spends $3.8 billion yearly on antipsychotic drugs, including 14,000 children, many under the age of 3. You're gonna put a 2-year-old that acts up, and we all know about anybody's had kids, you know about the terrible twos, okay? You don't drug them. You slap their little panties and say, don't do that. Now, here's something that's really scary. They estimate there's about 25 million Americans right now on these psychiatric SSRI drugs. If only 1/10 of 1% react violently to these drugs, that means there's still 25,000 potential mass murderers running around loose. Now that's pretty scary, but it has to do with the drugs. And the worst thing is that they're doing this to our veterans. And it's nothing new. Back in the 50s, they'd march all those soldiers up to within 100 yards of a nuclear bomb and say, don't look at the blast, and keep your helmet on so the radiation dust doesn't get on you. And they're still doing it. Michael's House, a Palm Springs drug treatment facility, reported that since 1999, more than 17,000 soldiers have been discharged from the U.S. military simply due to drug use. And then why not? The annual military spending on stimulant drugs, 2001, $7.5 million. 2010, $39 million. You got these guys over in Afghanistan and Iraq. It's 125 degrees. They're bored stiff, except for those few minutes when they're frightened as hell and totally panicked. And no wonder they're weirded out. And so what do? They give them the drugs. And then they come home, they're still on the drugs. Or then they try to get off, which apparently is even worse than going on. And then we wonder why the leading cause of death in the U.S. military over the past several years has been suicide. Now that's unconscionable. Marine Gunnery Sergeant Jesse James Duff says, I used to think it was just mismanagement. Now, I've been reporting on mismanagement for the past year, but now I realize it was all deliberate, and it was all in the name of the almighty dollar. Yeah, the almighty dollar for the pharmaceutical corporations, headed by people who want these veterans dead. This is why the Obama administration already has put out materials saying that vets are potential terrorists. House Majority Minority Leader John Bunner said to characterize men and women returning home after defending our country as potential terrorists is offensive and unacceptable. Yeah, but see, you don't hear much about that, believe me. All right, deadly water. Some of you are already onto this, and I simply want to point out that not only do we have a third of the nation's water supplies that are contaminated with at least 18 hazardous contaminants, but we've got just regular polluting the rest of it. On April the 1st, 2015, Governor Brown in California ordered mandatory water restrictions for the first time in its history. They asked all water districts to reduce water usage by 25%, and they've even got on the books, they haven't even started enforcing it yet, but if they feel like you're misusing your water, you can be fined up to $500. And what this has done is that they have started a whole new business out in California. If you pay these businesses money, they come around and paint your dead grass green so that your lawn looks nice. But and you can't water it because they don't have any water. But why don't they have any water? This past summer I was in Palm Springs, and they took me to this Palm Springs golf course. And as you can see, it's like this. It's beautiful, man. Everything's green, sprinklers going, and the greens, the fairways, they're all wonderful. It's in the middle of the desert, folks. And that was only one of 125 golf courses just in Palm Springs. So you put 125 golf courses in the desert and then wonder why you're running out of water? What's wrong with those people? Now, prior to World War II, you bought Sweeney's sodium fluoride as an insecticide, effective against cockroaches, water bugs, lice, and poultry. So don't let your chickens in it. All right? So it is sold as a rat poison. But then they found that it's an extremely neurotoxic chemical. And when you add it to the drinking water, it interrupts the basic function of nerve cells in the brain, causing docile, submissive behavior and lower IQ. This was determined by Charles Elliott Perkins, a U.S. chemist who was sent by the government over to Germany at the end of World War II. And he says the German chemists worked out a very ingenious and far-reaching plan adopted by the German General Staff. to control the population of any given area through mass medication of drinking water supplies. In the scheme of mass control, sodium fluoride occupied a prominent place. So they put sodium fluoride, which is a rat poison, but they found if you put just a little bit in some water, then it didn't kill you, but it drugged you down, dumbed you down, and numbed you to where you are passive and non-resistant, and you can't think, okay? So they put it in the water in the concentration camps to keep the inmates passive and submissive. In 2012, they did a study of 8,000 kids, and they showed the ones in high fluoride areas had significantly lower IQ scores than the ones in low fluoride areas. And yet, hey, you guys drinking Dallas water, you get your fluoride. Maybe that's why I am so honored to have each and every one of you here today. You actually have overcome your conditioning and the fluoride, and you got out of your house and came to hear something. I'm not asking you even for your belief. In fact, I say, don't trust me, don't believe me, but listen to what I'm saying, go check it out for yourself, and you're going to find out I'm telling you the truth. And once you know this truth, then it's up to you to share this with your friends, families, and or neighbors, okay? Because there's people at Topside, they want you dead. And chlorine's not much better, all right? I don't want to go into that. Head of Biochemical says water is the oil of the 21st century. And what did they do with oil? Well, just ask the Rockefellers. They got total dominating control over oil. And they are now trying to do this with water, okay? And this leads us to hydraulic fracturing, better known as fracking, where they pump up to 8 million gallons of water down into the earth under high pressure, along with all kinds of chemicals, including lead, uranium, mercury, hydrochloric acid, formaldehyde, to crack open the strata under the ground so they can recover more hydrocarbons, more gas, more oil. And yet, remember the three words, back in rock formation, we don't even need to be doing this, okay? They say they have to because they're running out of oil, and they got to find new sources, but they really don't. What they're doing is ruining the water tables. 80% of the 155,000 wells involved fracking, which was developed by, oh, surprise, surprise, Halliburton. Thank you, Dick Cheney. Now, just one more thing we can thank you for. And it not only pollutes the water supplies, but it causes earthquakes. In Oklahoma, from 1967 to the year 2000, they averaged just a little over one earthquake a year. But from 2000 to 2008, that's up to 6 quakes a year. And in just the first 2 months of this year, they've had 30 earthquakes in California. And they've studied it, and they've determined that it's due to human activity, which means fracking. Now, what do they do? They do it in water. Because, why? Because the wealthy 1% want to control the water. If you control the water, you control everybody. You can go a week or so without food. You're going to be real hungry, but you can still be alive. But you can go past about 3 days without water. And T. Boone Pickens, the Texas corporate raider, he has now bought up thousands of acres of land up along the Owadala Aquifer through the middle of the U.S., which is our breadbasket. They need that water for crops, for corn, wheat, soy. Warren Buffett, he's heavily invested in water technology that produces water treatments, filtering membranes. And you may recall a few years ago, it was reported the Bush family had bought over 300,000 acres in Paraguay. Okay, now knowing the Nazi background of Prescott Bush and the fact that he was actually prosecuted by the federal government in late 1942 as being nothing but a financial frontman for Hitler, and the Nazis had stripped of his holdings in Union Banking Corporation and the America Hamburg steamship line, I figured they were going to open up a housing development down there and maybe call it Borman Acres or something, you know. But come to find out, this 300,000 acres that the Bush family now owns in Paraguay just happens to sit atop the single largest body of groundwater in the world, the Guarani Aquifer. So the rich guys are getting control of the water. When I was a kid, I started about 13, I was working in a grocery store. If he'd come in to me at that point and said, hey, where do I find the water? I would have pointed you to the drinking fountain. Okay? Or say, go out there and there's a hose out connected to the faucet, you know, get some water. But so I was there and watched it all happen. First thing you know, you got a little shelf here and you got one little bitty section with some bottled water on it, you know. And now you go in the supermarkets, you got a whole aisle of bottled water. And what's even worse is, I was in there looking at all this, and I'm pointing, I see some really nice little package, you know, plastic bottles, and a little blue label, and a little cute cherubic baby on the front of it, you know, oh, that cute little baby water. It says baby water with fluoride. Baby fluoride when their little brains are supposedly, you know, growing. My God, what's wrong with us? They want you dead. They want your kids dead. And here's the three companies that are gaining control over the water. Perrier, Coca-Cola, and Nestle. I used to get some water called Ozarka water. And it said it came from the natural springs in northern Arkansas. And it was good water, and I liked it. And I used to get that now and then, especially if I was traveling, wanted to carry some water with me. And then all of a sudden, they had a lime water where they put a little bit of a lime taste in it. I thought that was really good. And it got me away from the sugar of soft drinks. And all of a sudden, I couldn't get that anymore. So I checked to find out what's going on. Well, they've been bought by Perrier. Okay? And now it's got fluoride in it. Air pollution. They're polluting our air. You know, we all know this. All you have to do is get far enough out Dallas and turn around there about and see the green, brown haze hanging over the whole city. And most cities are below the health minimum. See, you're required to have about 22% oxygen in your air to maintain your normal health. Most cities, and I'm sure Dallas is the same way, they operate about 18, 19%. And on the days they're saying, watch out, this high ozone day, it may be down to 15%. But what are you going to do? You know, if you work, you can't leave the city. It's gotten so bad in Beijing that here is the British school at Beijing had to put an inflatable dome over their exercise area so the kids could go out and play. Because they couldn't breathe the air. And the EPA stands here, McCarthy says that 1 in every 10 children in America suffer from asthma. And that's because of bad air.
Not just bad.
And I mentioned Fukushima, and that the Gulf is dead, well, so is the Pacific. And again, they're not even talking about it. And it's still spewing radiation, and now it's beginning to wash up on the shores of Washington State and California. And what's the federal government done about it? Well, they've shut down their quality stations on the West Coast. They don't tell you about it, you don't know about it, right? Y'all don't know about this, you didn't see it in the news, they didn't talk about it this morning or yesterday evening at 10 o'clock news, so it must not be happening, right? It's still happening. And the air currents are now bringing it all over the United States, and now occasionally you see these stories about dead whales wash up here, fish wash dead up over here, no algae up here. I mean, you see it and then it goes away and it doesn't stick, and so you go, oh, I guess everything's okay. Well, it's not. We're at a near extinction level event. The Japanese Prime Minister during the Fukushima says, well, it's impossible to totally prevent any kind of accident or disaster from happening. Now, I've come to change my position. The only way to do this was to totally get rid of nuclear power plants. Well, you don't hear from him anymore, do you? Because they're still trying to foist off more nuclear power plants on us. And this is what kills me here. All the little red dots are tornado areas, okay? And so where's all our nuclear power plants? Right in the thick of the tornado areas, you know? It's just mind-boggling. And of course, never mind about the chemtrails. How many of you know about chemtrails? All right, good. I'm not going to go into that much, but man, look, we already know what's in there. Barium, aluminum oxide. Aluminum oxide, hello? What are you told about not using aluminum cookware? If you use aluminum cookware, what do you get? Alzheimer's, okay? But they're dumping aluminum oxide on you, you have to breathe it, and it congregates, and it builds up in your system. They want you dead. And yes, there are contrails. That's a condensation trail. It's real simple. When you heat of an engine, whether it's jet or piston, and the heat gets up in that upper atmosphere with that very, very cold air, it condenses it into water vapor, and it streams off behind the airplane, okay? And depending on conditions, it may stream for a pretty good ways back, or it may just go for a little short wave. But either way, eventually it, as it cools off, it goes back into air and it just evaporates. And it's no big deal. But chemtrails go from horizon to horizon, and they don't go away. They don't dissipate. They spread out. And what started off to be a beautiful, clear blue Texas sky, by mid-afternoon is a milky white haze, and you're breathing. And once you did, here's just a few examples, and you can tell right away that that's not natural. I love this one right here. Oops, we went the wrong way. Let's go back this way. Oh, no, that's not right. Let's turn around and go back the other way. Oh, yeah, we'll form a pentagram on the side. But, and here we go. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Now, this is a contrail, and here's a chemtrail. It's that simple, folks. And yet, you can't even get your friends and neighbors to look up. If they do, they go, oh, well, I don't know. It's a contrail, I guess. Why? Because if they call the radio or TV station and say, what are those trails in the sky? The local DJ, he doesn't know. So he calls up the FAA, he said, what are those trails in the sky? And they're under orders. And, oh, that's just a contrail. People don't understand. Oh, okay. That's the end of that. Come on, people, start thinking for yourself. Here's a picture of the same plane. And all of a sudden, he's trailing all of these trails, and then they stop. Now, I don't claim to be an aviation expert, but I do know you don't cut off the engines in mid-flight. Same thing here. All you have to do is go and Google geoengineering, and you will learn that they have patents, they have papers written about how they can change the environment of the planet through geoengineering. And so they are two deliberate contamination programs, one by air and one by water. And when you combine these things, the chemtrail added to the fluoride, you're really causing mass sedation dementia. Now, I'll briefly mention, look at this map of Texas. That's cell phone towers. And they're putting them up more and more all the time. We are bombarded with electromagnetic energy. And I won't even go into this because it's really scary and we all like to use our cell phones. But when you hold my cell phone up to your head, you're holding a radio transmitter receiver up to your brain, and you've got those electromagnetic frequencies and energy just beaming straight into your body. And you better believe that it can be bad for your health. So please try to use earphones with hold your cell phone out away from you, or better yet, get one of these devices you put in your car so it's hands-free. I know I was debating with a guy not long back who says, well, I don't want to legalize marijuana. I don't want to get on the road with anybody who's stoned. And I said, well, I've seen the studies and I've seen my experience. I'd rather be on the road with somebody stoned than somebody talking on their cell phone. If you're on a cell phone, you're not paying attention, you're going to have a wreck. If you're stoned, you're probably really paying attention. And by the way, that's not just a funny joke. It's actually very true. There was a study the Air Force did one time. They got a group of test subjects. I forget now, maybe 20. And what they did was they set up a test where they had cars, they had them driving along, and then they had 2 or 3 cars in a row, and then they would suddenly jam on the brakes, okay? And they would see about the reaction time of the guy, the test subject behind them, and see if they'd stop in time or if they'd hit them, And so first they did on Cold Stone sober, and then they did them on 0.10 alcohol, and then they did them where they all said, yeah, I'm stoned on marijuana. The people, needless to say, the people who were drunk did 20% less or worse than the people who were regular. The people who were stoned did about 20% better than the people who were not stoned or drunk. Okay? Because they were right on it, man. It stopped. Anyway, I thought that was funny. But cell phones, these things, we need to be worried about that too. All this electromagnetic energy, and this may have something to do with chemtrails, because when you fill the air with heavy metals, it enhances the effectiveness of these radio frequencies. And we know the breakdown of cell phone dangers. Please tell your kids about this. Some of us older folks, our brains are probably about as fried as they're ever going to get. So, but hey, these young developing brains, they do not need to be constantly bombarded with these cell phone frequencies. Here you can see before cell phone use and after. It heats up the body, heats up the brain, it causes problems. I'm not saying you don't have one or use one. If I'm stuck out in out of the boondocks somewhere and I have a breakdown, I think it's just a godsend to have a cell phone so you can call and get some help, okay? But I'm telling you, you need to use your cell phone like you use your credit card. Keep it with you at all times, but don't use it unless it's an emergency. And even here, these poor people that sit there with these laptops on their, with Wi-Fi on their laps, we don't have to worry about them. They won't have any children. Television is mind controlled. All you do is sit there and it just bombards you. You don't have to think. You don't have to do anything. And look at what's going on. If your parents, think about it, if your grandparents, you've got these young kids and 3 and 4 or 5 years old, and they're bright, they're energetic, they're inquisitive, they're just full of curiosity and life, and then you send them to school, and they drag back home. What you do in school today? Nothing. Okay, and they just all of a sudden, public schools turn them into little brain dead zombies because they are taught and conditioned not to ask questions, not to cause trouble, but simply raise their hand if they want to say something, follow the rules. We've all been through that condition. Luckily, I think you guys are probably the exception, or you wouldn't be here tonight. All right. What's happening to books? I'm going to have to start doing videos or something because nobody seems to be reading much anymore. In fact, I'll tell you a true story. Up in Wise County, the high school my wife taught at for many years, and about 3 years ago she retired as the art teacher. And she called up the art teacher that took the place, and she said every year at graduation they always had the senior art exhibit. They take the best work of some of the seniors and they put it up in the school library and have a little after-school art exhibit, which was kind of cool. I went up here many times, helped her put this stuff up. So she called up the new art teacher and said, I'll be willing to come and help you put up the senior art exhibit. She said, well, we're not going to have a senior art exhibit. And she said, well, why? She said, well, they've taken all the books out of the school library and turned it into an internet cafe. So we got a high school with a library with no books. Is this where we're going? Well, it's John D. Rockefeller who formed the National Teachers Association, which is now he formed the General Education Board, which is now the National Teachers Association. And he was quoted saying, I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers. They want to teach you just enough to where you can sit in your cubicle and handle paperwork and add up the invoices or something, but not enough to where you're actually going to read and think for yourself. Here we go. I've actually seen this myself. You all may have too. The express line, 15 minutes. It's this many. And even then, it doesn't seem to work, does it? We always got some jerk that's got about 50 items and he's trying to run through the express lines. There we are, though, the dumbing down of America, and of course, all this would be impossible without imposing a police state. Now, the government. Homeland Security is providing these MRAPs, that's mine-resistant, ambush-protective, armored cars, little tanks basically. And I ask you, what does the police department need a tank for to chase down speeders and shoplifters? And yet the government, the Pentagon, is giving them this equipment with the provision that if they don't use it within a year, they got to give it back. So now, all of a sudden, we see more and more, even little towns now have their own SWAT team. Dallas has a SWAT team, okay? And yet, these SWAT teams were originally formed for serious cases where you had a gunman barricaded in somewhere, or you had a group like the Sudanese National Army that are trying to start something, But no, they're using them on drug raids. And if you read my book, Population Control, you'll read example after example of people who got killed. The poor baby Boo-Boo is maimed with a flashbang grenade that was thrown in his crib, and then they wouldn't even pay for his rehabilitation. This is just god awful, folks, but this is what happens in a police state. And so today we have more police per capita in the United States today than any other nation in the world. Any other nation in the world, and think about some of these places like Kosovo or Baghdad or Somalia, you know, you think that they were crawling with police, Argentina, you know. We got more police per capita here than anywhere else in the world. And our prison population more than any place else in the world. Is this what you guys want? And when did the boys in blue become the boys in black? And I'll tell you one of the reasons why the police are more aggressive and they have more killings is because they are being trained by Israeli counterterrorism experts. They have sent people from Dallas, police officials to Israel. They brought their people over here, and they have a whole different situation. They're surrounded by Arab enemies who are bound and determined to drive them into the sea, and they have a real security problem. But they're coming over here and teaching our policemen to be counter-terrorists. And who's the terrorist? You and me. Ephraim Friday said, you know, when they come back home, you're the enemy. And that's true. It's very true. When I started off as a police reporter back in the 60s, and I watched it all happen, okay? It was the police showed up and they realized that they were public servants. And a good, honest citizen would go, hey, you know, I pay your salary. And they go, yes, sir. But now it's the other way around. Also, and one reason for that is because back then when I started, if a case suddenly involved something and the federal showed up, the FBI say, they came with their hat in their hand. And they said, would you mind if we helped you out on this case? Well, the local police, they were all enthralled because they watched, I Lived 3 Lives for the FBI and that movie with Efren Zimbalist, you know, the FBI. And they thought the FBI just owned the moon. And man, they were so happy to have the FBI come in and help them on the case, you know. But even in about the 15 years that I was there, by the time I was leaving and not covering the police anymore, it had totally reversed. Now the police are there, they got a case, and the FBI shows up and says, FBI, we're taking over here. And they would. And the local police would just step aside. Yes, we go. The Gestapo was formed. So now, you know, I ask you, does this look like law enforcement or does this look like occupational? We all hear about these police shootings. We all heard about Michael Brown, even though that's his 12-year-old picture. He was 18, okay? And now they've proven that he was beaten up on the cop. Well, we heard all about that endlessly. You never heard about Dylan Taylor, did you? That was Salt Lake City. He and his brother and another friend were at a 7-Eleven, and there was some kind of problem there. The cop showed up, and they were walking off. The cop said, stop, and his brother and his friend stopped, but he was wearing earphones and apparently did not hear the order to stop. He kept walking, and the cop shot him and killed him. And the people in Salt Lake City were very upset about this. White kid shot by a black cop. So they staged demonstrations down at the police station in Salt Lake City. The police chief, he didn't send out guys in armor and batons and shields. He sent a few of his officers out there to talk with the crowd. They said, we understand. We're going to investigate this. The demonstrators came back for another day or two and demonstrated lawfully out in front of the police station. And then they, worked it all out. You never heard a word about that, did you? So see how the media can drum up a situation. Surveillance state, we all know that we're all under surveillance. You may not know about this one. See this balloon? This is a Joint Land Attack Cruise Missile Defense Elevated Netted Sensor System, JLEN. This balloon is on a tether. They can raise it up high into the air, and it can monitor almost the entire eastern seaboard. It can read your license plate. It can tell what kind of expression you have on your face. And they can subject that to facial recognition. By 2020, we're supposed to have 30,000 drones in the air, perfectly capable of carrying weapons. Well, that's going to really be good, isn't it? They've already had some close shaves. Over in Germany, a passenger liner was coming in for a landing, and the wingtip got clipped by a drone. And so, this is just a tragedy waiting to happen. But nobody seems to know or care, and you never hear anything about it much on the news. But now we did hear from this guy, Edward Snowden. Y'all can think whatever you want to. I think he's a hero. I really do, because he pretty much gave up his life to simply confirm to a lot of us, like myself, who already knew what was going on, but we couldn't prove it. But he showed up and proved it, and had the documents and showed that they're listening to everything you say and do here. A total violation of the Fourth Amendment. And here's what I like. I don't know how many of y'all know about Jade Helm 15. All right, how many of y'all have seen the Jade Helm logo right here? Jade Helm, master the human domain. Oops, wait a minute, master the human domain. What does that mean? Well, you know, the human domain is anything having to do with humans. But what I really like is, what's this right in the middle here? You don't really notice that, but if you look closely, you'll see that it's a wooden clog, a wooden shoe, just like that. And what does that connotate? The Nazi concentration camps. They had people striped pajamas to wear and wooden shoes. So that clomp, that hear you coming. 2, you couldn't run very fast. And 3, they didn't give them socks, so those wooden shoes would irritate your feet. They'd get infected and you'd die soon. Now, why are they putting a symbol of Nazi concentration camp on the Jade Helm 15 military exercises in the United States? When in their material they have listed Texas as a hostile state. So, you know, sometimes it's kind of funny reading from Camp Kingdom, but they do have these camps ready to go. Most of them are supposedly closed military bases, but they still have caretakers and they're still being kept up. They can be turned into a camp very, very easily. In fact, they did, if you all remember, when Castro let loose his prisons and his insane asylums and sent all the boat people over to the United States. And I was reading that they were housing them at Fort Chaffee, Arkansas. Well, when I was in the Army, I got stationed at Fort Chaffee briefly, and I said, I thought they closed Fort Chaffee. So I checked, sure enough, officially Fort Chaffee was closed, but they kept it up. And when they needed to turn it into a holding camp, it was there ready to go. So FEMA is ready to move, all right? And at various places, they have photographed and shown these multi-occupant sealed coffins. What's that all about? So they want you dead, and they're doing it from bad air, bad food, bad water, right down the lines. And what you have to understand is that these people I'm talking about, they do have names and addresses. If you want to know who they are, I can give you the whole list, but it probably wouldn't be good because you wouldn't recognize their names. But in my book, Population Control, in the appendix, they, for the first time, they actually published the attendee list to the Bilderberg meeting. Okay? And I published it as an appendix, and you can read the names of the people who are there. Now, all of these people are not sinister conspirators. In fact, most of them are probably just representatives from these owners. But there's enough royalty in there, there's enough high-ranking officials, and a lot of high-ranking American officials attend, but they won't let their name be known because there are laws in the United States against private citizens dealing with foreign governments, and that's what this is. They probably could be tried for crimes. So they don't, this is where the message is passed. They belong to secret societies like the Trilateral Commission. I love their logos that look suspiciously like a stylized swastika. They belong to the Council on Foreign Relations, which was created in 1921 for the express purpose of propagandizing the American people to the desirability of world government. And they all meet once a year under the Bilderberg. Now, so when you really get down to it, there is no two-party system in this country. We've got the somewhat liberal Democratic wing, and you've got the somewhat conservative right wing of the one party, the War Party. Now, they'll let you argue and fight over stem cell experiments or same-sex marriage, and if you're into that, then you know that the media is pretty much on the liberal side. But I maintain the media is only as liberal as the conservative owners allow them to be, because you never hear them talking about corporate misdeeds or corruption. So there's really only, and foreign policy never changes. So it doesn't matter which wing you want to adhere to, you're still back in the War Party. And Mussolini pretty well nailed it, because the word fascism actually comes from his black-shirted fascistas. And so he's credited with coining the term fascism. But he himself said fascism should be more appropriately called corporatism, ruled by the corporation. And most dictionaries will tell you the definition of fascism is the blending of state and corporate power. And I ask you, isn't that what we have here in the United States right now? Absolutely. So the hope is the joke, and the change is whatever's left in your pocket. And if you want a vision of the future, said George Orwell in 1984, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. But that's if we put up with it. About you, I don't know about you guys, but I don't want to put up with it. So let's all start talking with our friends and our neighbors and see if we can get this country back on even keel. Thank you. And got time for some questions, I suppose. Any questions? Yes, ma'am. What do I suggest you do? Step one is inform yourself of what's really going on. And I think the best way to do that